Yeah, yeah. I'm like, yeah. I'm in the street with a robber. I had to run from the cop. I caused some beef with my partner. I had to sleep with a chopper. They try to creep on my mama. Yeah.
Nashawn Jones, who's better known as rapper Honeykomb Brazy, is from Alabama, and at one point was gaining major attention, not just for his music. Everything about his come up has been nothing less than chaos, from shooting and paralyzing his own cousin at 13 to his grandparents getting killed by his ops, all followed by him going viral for a 7-minute freestyle. Then, in the brink of blowing up, he was arrested for violating his probation and is now serving 13.5 years.
Real rapper Honeykomb Brazy, whose grandparents' high-profile murder remains unsolved, back in Mobile, locked up in Metro tonight.
Oh, come on, damn, slick, bitch, I'm trying to bitch down.
Brazy was born and raised in the city of Mobile, Alabama, in an area that was specifically known for its drugs and crime. He was mostly raised by his grandparents as the rest of his family was constantly in and out of jail. This included both his parents and uncles. This gave him a lot more freedom than most kids his age, so unfortunately he chose to follow in their footsteps. Crime was normal for him. At 10 years old, he and his friends broke into a go-kart factory and rode them around until the police arrived. This caused him to be put on probation at an extremely young age, and the trend would just continue. Because of this, he ended up dropping out of school in the 8th grade. After giving up on school, he was forced to live with his aunt, but ended up getting kicked out of her house too for shooting his own cousin. He said his cousin and dad were doing business together, and an issue over money happened, so Honeykomb took things into his own hands because his dad was locked up at the time. The shooting would leave his cousin paralyzed and in critical condition. He tried to duck authorities by going on the run, but was inevitably caught. At just 13, he was booked and charged for this. He sat for 4 years and wasn't released until he was 17. Almost immediately, he was caught up again for a robbery gone wrong, where another person ended up shot. The man was walking down the street when he stated 2 teens approached him, making small talk. Before he even realized he was about to be robbed, he said one of them pulled out a gun and shot him in the leg. Then they proceeded to take the money out of his pockets before running off. Brazy and his friend, who's known as Det, were identified as the shooters. According to Honeykomb, Det was the one who actually pulled the trigger, but the day he went to appear in court for the case, Det was killed over a $5 game of dice in his own neighborhood. Because of this, Honeykomb Brazy ended up taking the charge and doing an additional 4 years behind bars. He was released in 2016, where he wasted no time getting back to his old ways. A childhood friend of Brazy named Stank came home to his apartment one night when his girlfriend started acting weird on his arrival. He bust the door down and found Brazy in his house with this girl, supposedly selling her weed and nothing more. Stank didn't believe their story and got aggressive. The two got into it, and Brazy ended up shooting and killing Stank. Once again, he spent over a year in jail fighting this case, even sharing a cell with his own dad for 6 months of that. While he was locked up, he admitted he got into a lot of fights, even bragging that he stabbed 3 people in a single day. He eventually beat the case and was allowed to walk as long as he finished his probation.
You in jail, you stabbed a guy 3 times? You stabbed 3 different people?
Yeah, I did a whole lot of shit. I done stabbed way more people than that on blood, on my dead brother grave, like way more than that. I was on probation, so I had to goddamn bag up my time. But they had fully revoked me. I had like 15 years. Y'all know what I just was on. But I got my cases overturned though. Yeah, I got my cases overturned, so now I'm back, you feel me?
But when he came home, things were different, and people from the neighborhood stopped associating with him after the murder of Stank. This even led to him getting in a shootout with some of his friends from his hood, almost losing his life. Brazy got shot in the head and was in a coma for over a week, with doctors telling him he'd never walk again. Despite this, within a few months, he was already back on the block, planning his revenge. Although he was still heavy in the streets, he needed an outlet to tell his story. He decided to try and take rapping more serious, so he booked some studio time. This was a step in the right direction, but by this time, Honeykomb was already in too deep. In June of 2018, he dropped a song titled Freestyle that would go viral, gaining over 50 million plays on YouTube alone. It was a hit, and he instantly got Alabama's approval. This gave him a massive buzz and even got him a deal with Rap-A-Lot Records, one of the biggest labels in the South. Things seemed like they were finally going good for a while, now that he was distracted from the streets dealing with music and shows. But eventually, he was brought back to his life of crime. One day, he and some friends were sitting in a car outside a barbershop in Montgomery County. They were on Facebook Live streaming the entire incident. A gray BMW pulled up alongside them, letting shots off, to which Brazy and his crew fired back, but it's unclear if anyone was actually hit. And if that wasn't enough, things would only get worse.
Start with continuing coverage after 2 people are found dead inside a burned home. We have learned that the 2 are the grandparents of a local well-known rapper.
Shortly after all this happened, Honeykomb Brazy's grandparents were killed after their home was set on fire. Witnesses said they heard gunshots fired into their home, followed by a loud explosion. This was later revealed to be his grandparents' oxygen tanks exploding. The way this all went down made it obvious this was no accident. Brazy posted this message to his Instagram where he apologized to his grandparents for getting them caught up in his mess. He wasn't even in town at the time, so he knew whoever did this personally wanted to hurt his grandparents to get to him. After a few months, police identified a man named Darren Southall.
Southall already scheduled to appear in court this November on charges he oversaw a large drug enterprise operation along the Gulf Coast. He's also been named as a person of interest in the killings of Tony and Layla Lewis, the couple killed in Mobile's Happy Hill community back in February. They also happen to be the grandparents of a local rapper, Honeykomb Brazy.
I've been in this shit for a little minute, I like sit to say. My little partner Gemini, he ride with a Smith & Wesson. Too much killing going on in Mobile, I had to...
Darren was a known drug kingpin in Alabama, and he was arrested for unrelated drug charges. He was still named the person of interest in this case though, because he's also the uncle of Stank, the same man Brazy killed back in 2016. Mobile, Alabama was turning into a war zone, and Brazy was making new enemies daily. But his music career was also blowing up in the middle of all this. Unfortunately, it would be very short-lived because he was simply too involved in the streets and his cases were all catching up to him. He ended up violating his parole when he decided to upload a new music video to YouTube where he's clearly in possession of weapons and drugs. This all stems from his 2016 case where he only served 18 months of his sentence and was set free. Now they wanted him to finish the 13.5 years he still had left for not following his probation. They tried booking him once before, but didn't have the evidence to put him away. This time they had music videos and clips posted on his social medias that showed him around guns and drugs to seal the case. Of course, his lawyers argued that the guns and weapons were just props, but the court was able to pull up the shootout video that Brazy posted online years before that showed his crew firing back at the barbershop. On top of this, his own probation officer told the court Brazy used to brag to him about taking Percocets and smoking weed. As much as his lawyer fought to protect his freedom, at the end of the day, he was really living his raps, and it was only inevitable he'd have to face the consequences. Brazy said in an interview, this life chose him the moment he was born into a family of crime. His dad is locked up for a murder charge and his uncles are still behind bars to this day. Brazy's music blew up because it was honest and real, stories from the daily life he actually lived. But that was his opportunity to focus on his career and leave that life behind.
I know these streets raw, that wild clutching. I know these niggas flout, I don't trust it. Clutching, y'all, clutching, y'all, clutching, y'all, clutching, y'all, clutching, y'all, clutching, clutching, clutching. I know these streets raw, that wild clutching.